Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the first lecture of our lecture series this spring semester. We usually hold these lectures at the mothership in Muncie, the College of Architecture and Planning. But in this opportunity, we saw a chance to outreach and come here to our outpost in Indianapolis and share this important lecture with both locations. Those of you in the neighborhood of Indianapolis or in Indy itself, and with the mothership, with our auditorium that right now is holding our students and a number of guests back there at Muncie. As you know, this kind of event is not something that happens just by magic. A lot of work and effort goes into putting them together. So I first of all would like to recognize two people that have made an extraordinary effort on making this happen. Brad Bovian, our director here at the center in Indianapolis, and Carol Street, our lecture series coordinator there at the mothership in Muncie. So please give them a hand. Also, I would like to recognize two colleagues that have invested a great deal of effort on making this happen. First, Professor Bruce Frankel, who has championed this lecture from day one, and we are very grateful for the hard work of helping us make this happen. And also I would like to recognize the chair of the Department of Urban Planning, Michael Buraidi, who has helped us also in this quest. Before I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker this afternoon, I would like to invite Professor Frankel for a couple of minutes here to the podium because he has very interesting, exciting news. And many of you probably already heard about this, but I will leave him tell us all about it.
I'm pregnant. Sounds like the proper introduction to that. Believe it or not, actually, I'm pregnant. So, and at my age, that's quite an accomplishment. What I want to do, and the reason I'm excited about this, and it gives me a great deal of pleasure to announce this because I've been working on this for some time. I have a lot of supporters, and I'll be mentioning them in a moment, but there was a couple of handouts you might have noticed as you came into the room. The announcement about the initiation of a real estate development graduate certificate program. The program would be housed in this center, right in the heart of Indianapolis, Circle Center. It would be a program that would accommodate 15 credit hours. It's equivalent of about 5 courses that would be taken. So it could be accomplished very easily in an academic year or even over a summer, 2 summer terms that'd be offering courses. It is, again, pick up a copy for that, and we're going to be offering courses starting this summer. The program was approved for the fall of 2011, but it was also approved for early implementation. So we're offering a full set of courses this summer at the center itself, and one or more of those courses may also be offered fully online for those who can't be accommodated by the center. It is a program that is interdisciplinary. I'm very proud of that. Goes outside of the College of Architecture and Planning, goes into the College of Business, Science and Humanities, and Applied Science and Technology. So we borrow courses from each one of those disciplines. And thirdly, it is a program that falls in the highest reaches of the Ball State tradition of engagement with community and outreach purposes. So you will find, and please expect this, that we will be coming closer to where you are. We want you to share the intractable problems that you may have, whether you're a member of any one of the economic sectors, the public sector. We have people from the planning department that are here, the nonprofit sector that are trying to revitalize their neighborhoods or downtown business districts, and of course the for-profit developers and their professional support in the industry. So hopefully we'll start an applied research and service center on this satellite campus, and we're also initiating our search for advisory board members for this, the first of which is Dennis Aucklock. It gives me great pleasure to mention his name and to see him safe here. The CEO and chair of Duke Realty, one of the largest real estate development firms, and having their international headquarters here in Indianapolis. He is also an accounting alumnus of Ball State University. Chris Palladino, where are you, Chris? I saw you earlier. There he is in the back. Chris is a special assistant in business affairs at Ball State University. He's the former project director of the Fall Creek Place and many other projects with Manser. And he's also a Bachelor of Urban Planning and Design alumnus of the university. Brad Balbian was mentioned before as director. I reiterate my dean as being very instrumental in terms of the development of the program, and my chair, Michael Burritti, in terms of that. At our remote campus setting, I just want to mention the chair of Family and Consumer Science. This was an interdisciplinary program, so that chair was involved, Jayanthi Kandiya, and also Mitch Whaley, the dean of the College of Applied Science and Technology. I wanted to recognize him as well in terms of the formation of the program. We have many distinguished guests here. I've only been given a couple of minutes, but we have representation from the mayor's office that is present here. The planning department has sent over two of their top leaders of that particular department. LISC itself is present here. The Local Initiative Support Corporation, Bill Taft, Indiana Housing Community Development Authority, Mark Young is here, Bill Pritchard, Chris Haley, Katie Brett, and others. I wanted to also welcome them to this particular event, a very good cross-section. And at the remote center, we have Bruce Baldwin, Brad Bookout, and from the city's Historic Preservation Officer, Bill Morgan, I think, indicated he would be present. So I'm going to turn this back to my good Dean, Guillermo. Did he introduce himself? I don't think he mentioned his name because it's very long, very, very long. So Guillermo Vasquez de Velasco. I almost got that wrong again.
Thank you, Bruce.
I'll turn
Thank you.
Thank you.
By the way, I offer a summer workshop for those interested in actually learning my whole name. So, we can do it on distance ed if necessary. It's certainly a challenge. Well, now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today that brings us a lecture entitled The Shrinking City Syndrome, Repeating the Mistakes of Urban Renewal. Her name is Roberta Brandes Gratz, and I'm assuming an Austrian connection on part of the last name?
Probably.
So I'll try my best to put an Austrian accent every time I say Graz.
Yes, there is Graz, Austria. I've lived in there.
Lovely place. Mrs. Gratz is an award-winning journalist and urban critique, lecturer, and author of a number of renowned publications. Among several, I would like to mention The Living City, Cities Back from the Edge, and of course, her most recent publication, The Battle for Gotham. She is an international lecturer on urban development issues and former award-winning reporter for the New York Post. In 2003, Mayor Bloomberg appointed her to the New York City Landmark Preservation Commission, and in 2005, in collaboration with Jane Jacobs, Mrs. Gratz and a small group of accomplished urbanists founded the Center for the Living City. Mrs. Gratz articles have appeared in the New York Times, in the Wall Street Journal, The Nation, and a large number of scholarly journals. Her writings have been translated to Japanese, Russian, Czech, German, and Polish. She travels frequently around the United States, Central Europe, Japan, and the United Kingdom to lecture and consult on urban issues. Mrs. Gratz was recently featured in a New York Times article entitled Return of a Long Dormant Island of Grace. Please help me welcome Roberta Brandes Gratz. Thank you for joining us.
Well, I'm not pregnant. Been there, done that. I'm glad to be here, although I have to say, I'll let you know tomorrow night. If I make it back to New York, then I will be appreciative of Bruce pushing me to come now. If I'm still in that hotel tomorrow, I'll be cursing it. Because I said, this is the time of year this happens. So coming from New Orleans, where it's 70, so why am I here? Why am I going to New York? At any rate, but I'm here, and I'm really happy to be here. I haven't been in Indianapolis in a while, and I'm going to enjoy being able to report to our new deputy mayor, your former mayor, the next time. He heads the Mayor's Committee for Sustainable, the Sustainable Advisory Committee, which I have now been appointed to, off the Landmarks Commission and on Sustainability Advisory Board, which actually I'm thrilled about because preservation should be part of that. And he heads that, and he's now deputy mayor in New York. Took a lot of heat a week or so ago for snow removal, but I think they got it now. They hopefully by tomorrow they'll have it, so I'll get there. An insidious disease is spreading around the beleaguered cities in this country. The disease has various names: creative shrinkage, right-sizing the city, or planned shrinkage. By whatever name this ostensible new policy is called, it is just good old-fashioned urban renewal by another name. Many don't know or remember what urban renewal was, and there are probably some students at our other site who only vaguely know. But it was a post-World War II, very well-funded federal program to rebuild cities. The essential notion was that existing cities and neighborhoods were old, in different stages of neglect or blight, or just anachronistic. Demolition and rebuilding in new ways were the solution. The theory, based on no evidence, was that density causes crime and poverty, and that diminishing it would minimize both. A theory disproven many times since the 1950s and 60s, and that's an important point. With urban renewal came highways through the city, of which you all know the classic examples, causing enormous demolition of troubled but retrievable neighborhoods and destructive isolation of neighborhoods that simply continued to deteriorate. I focus on this history and the unrecognized consequences of it in my book, The Battle for Gotham, New York in the Shadow of Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs. And although New York is in the title, and I weave through it a lot of the lessons I learned from being born and brought up in New York, the story in this book is about all American cities and the clash of urban philosophies that shaped them after World War II. Few cities did not get swept up in the years of urban renewal and highway building. One rare example, by the way, very rare, was Savannah, where, as I love to repeat, one local told me they defeated urban renewal as a communist plot. The federal largesse was irresistible. Projects were funded with 90% federal funds and 10% local and state funds. A politician's dream. In effect, however, the shrinkage and accelerated demise of our cities was begun at this time. Cities had suffered from lack of reinvestment during the war, no doubt. Neglect came with a price. Reinvestment was sorely needed, but this was the absolute wrong formula, as we could easily see today. What it did, though, was spur suburban development and urban abandonment. As some neighborhoods were cleared, adjacent neighborhoods declined, causing more people to leave town and doing nothing to reverse the spiral. The sprawl we bemoan today originated at that time. Many other negative things came with these policies, too many to mention here, but it all added up to a downward spiral. Density was made the big bugaboo. The false notion was promulgated that de-densifying neighborhoods would diminish crime and diminish poverty. Today, we understand the reverse is true, although this is not reflected in current federal policies, and not a lot of awareness of this is clear. Urban renewal destroyed more residential units than was replaced by towers in the park or any other new development. Highways through the cities piggybacked on the massive clearance of urban renewal, this time demolished more whole neighborhoods. Thousands of industrial and small businesses and the jobs that came with them were lost, along with countless housing units. Planned shrinkage followed. I go into great detail of the history of planned shrinkage in my first book, In the Living City. Planned shrinkage followed in the 1970s. The idea that cities should close down failing neighborhoods, shut off the infrastructure built to accommodate density, and concentrate investment in neighborhoods still worthy of middle-income investment. Tell me what's different today about the shrinkage proponents than planned shrinkage was then. Places like the South Bronx were left to burn. Since the 90s, we have Hope 6, the HUD redevelopment program, which tore down public housing projects that, of course, got built after the war, and built smaller, less dense, economically integrated suburban projects in their place in cities. But the problem is that invariably a smaller number of total units replaced what was demolished, leaving even less affordable housing and less density than before. Displaced low-income families were sent with Section 8 vouchers to already marginal neighborhoods, guaranteed to create the next blighted neighborhood needing replacement. The spiral continues. Like urban renewal, Hope 6 replaced less than it demolished. And thus the spiraling loss of affordable housing and the de-densification of cities that started under urban renewal continues today. More recently has come urban agriculture, which, although a good idea for backyards, empty lots, and modest-scale community gardens, is suddenly scaled up to whole neighborhoods. The old house in those areas, even in their deteriorated condition, old houses, even in deteriorated condition, are built more solidly than any of the flimsy new structures replacing them today. I call this the pastoralization of cities. It is meant to make demolition of vacant housing appealing. With all of this comes the theory that the salvation of distressed cities today is to once again shrink. As if shrinking had not been tried before and succeeded somewhere, but who knows where? And who knows that people can't be lured back? I was telling the students this morning, in the 1970s, the planning department of New York City predicted that New York City's population would shrink to 5 million people. We're at 8.4. So they didn't expect anyone back. They didn't expect the South Bronx to be to the point today where you can't find an empty lot to build on. So this is happening in many places, and I keep asking, can anyone point to one city, just one, where any of these renewal schemes have worked to regenerate rather than further erode a city? Just one. No theory, please. Just real on-the-ground success. Planners love models, but somehow no model for this policy has been exhibited. Instead of real answers, I keep being told why this city or that one is different, how industry and jobs have left, how reality must be faced. But the reality is that the urban process functions the same regardless of the particulars. And I don't care which city, but the urban process is by itself identifiable in any city. The variations are in what combination of elements are used to turn a negative into a positive. Instead of thinking that removing the negative is the answer, the thinking should be focused on how do we encourage the formation and nurturing of new businesses, not just jobs, and nurturing new businesses, entrepreneurial business, not just jobs. The new cabinet maker, the solar panel creator, the garment producer, the violin maker, the chip maker, the bicycle manufacturer. Any of these production businesses could grow into a new job-producing business, starting small. Excuse me, that is the way Ford, Macy's, Apple, Microsoft all started. Businesses with less than 100 employees today produce 85% of the new jobs in this country, and we only seem to know how to think big. Without innovative growth instead of shrinkage, when does a city become a non-city? In fact, a town or a village? No such thing as a hybrid city-suburban combination is possible. Conventional wisdom today clearly notes that a key to a successful city is density. New small businesses, old businesses, innovative startups, street life, public transit, walkability, community connections, diversity and appealing indoor and outdoor entertainment attractions only emerge from or follow density. Yet the theory that troubled cities need to face reality and plan for shrinkage proliferate. So the question is why? Endless examples of success, not theory, of the opposite strategy do exist. I've now written 3 books filled with all those examples, and a lot of my current online columns. You can find them on my website, from Syracuse to New Orleans to wherever. They're all over. From the dollar houses that originally started in Baltimore, initiated in the 70s, and has begun in places like Syracuse now, and the regeneration of the South Bronx by the community efforts that successfully fought planned shrinkage, to the current efforts from Buffalo, Pittsburgh, New Orleans, Houston, Portland, you name it. All these efforts represent innovative strategies to bring people back, to nurture new business formations, to regenerate instead of shrink, to build on observable successes instead of following a simplistic theory. It only happens in small step-by-step doses. So one would think that with all the rhetoric about building green, sustainable development, and conservation, that a realization would dawn that conservation of buildings is the first step of a sustainable development strategy. I don't mean just historic preservation as is now understood more widely, but just conservation of standing structures. The wood and brick of old structures are inherently more energy efficient than new materials. In fact, modern materials such as steel, aluminum, and plastic use far more energy to produce than traditional building materials such as brick, stone, and wood. You can't aspire to be an environmentalist and ignore the serious consequences of demolition. According to the EPA, construction and demolition debris, mostly demolition debris, account for 60% of non-industrial waste. A 50,000 square foot standing commercial building represents the same amount of fuel energy as 14.6 million car miles. Renovated old buildings continue to save energy if given new life. If a renovated building lasts 100 years, longer than any new one will last, you could use 25% more energy every year and still have less lifetime energy use than if you have a building that lasts 40 years. And most buildings being built today won't even last 40 years. And most old buildings can be made to be even more energy efficient than they ever were. In the epilogue of my current book, I demonstrate how a major restoration project that I initiated in New York 20-some-odd years ago is a model of green design, while being the preservation of an historic synagogue. The confusing thing is that reasonable-sounding rhetoric seems to accompany the creative shrinkage theorists. Hard to know what's creative here, but that's what it's called. But let's look at some of the actual implementation differences between following the demolition path and the regeneration path. Clues to the real motives become apparent. Demolition money is easy to come by. Often CDBG money provided by the federal government. Demolition contracts are easy, often big, and of course given to the familiar cast of eager characters who also often represent the political campaign contributors. Mayors love the photo op that gives the impression of cleaning up blight. In contrast, money for stabilization and/or renovation has to be patched together from multiple sources. Lenders don't like the look of dilapidated old buildings, even if they are historic and architecturally beautiful. They do, however, understand demolition and formula building projects. And even though preservation, restoration, conservation, and renovation have saved more neighborhoods than urban renewal ever did, the money to do more of it is never as easy to get as demolition and new construction funds. The housing industrial complex displays its muscle, much like the military industrial complex. The problems go beyond power and influence. Bureaucrats have little or no experience handling such rescue and regeneration projects. Renovation doesn't easily conform to today's building codes, many of which have not been updated for years, at least to current ideas. And those building codes were written when the car-oriented suburban model was the model of choice. Building inspectors as well don't have enough experience to understand how to deal with this. They only know current materials and methods and understand little about the old ones. Money doesn't exist for just cleaning out, stabilizing, securing, and land banking worthy structures. And sadly, remaining residents are under the illusion that demolition of the next-door vacant nuisance solves crime, cleans up neighborhoods, and improves the community. We know that the problems just move on. They don't disappear. The problems are not because of the physical buildings. That's a different issue. Instead of improvement, the land lies fallow for years, undermines further nearby marginal areas, and eventually, if suddenly the idea of shrinkage is not being promoted, a developer comes along to build, unfortunately too often, a very suburban-like community of garage-front look-alike dwellings with a smaller number of units than could ever be characterized as urban. Without the density, no public transit is viable. No local stores and community-serving businesses develop. More car-dependent shopping malls and business centers perhaps get built instead, and thus it is created a non-urban, car-dependent enclave detached from the remaining city, adding no strength to the existing urban fabric. Promises are made that expenses will be cut by shrinking the areas serviced by the city. But who will clean up the abandoned cars, the tires, the discarded furniture on empty lots? Police the areas fought over by gangs, or prevent squatters from developing shanty towns? Land banking for new development? That's called a pipe dream. Despite the obstacles, and there are certainly many, tried and true strategies for regeneration do exist. They vary from city to city. One size does not fit all. The successful efforts share a common characteristic. With each, something positive is added. Nothing is taken away. Even in the neighborhoods where vacant lots are offered to a remaining resident next door for a garden, an extension, or something else, something new is getting added. In some community-led efforts where nonprofits retrieve and renovate or help a new occupant renovate an abandoned structure, new investments, small and large, become visible. Areas where artists are moving into cheap or free spaces are the most visible successes, where the positive is added instead of the negative removed. The dilapidated vacant houses get fixed and occupied, addition instead of the subtraction. However, I point out that it's not artists, only artists who do these things. Nowadays, with all the new online businesses that are being created that are site neutral, young people can start a new business in any place they choose to be. It's not just artists that are going into these retrievable cheap opportunities. And Detroit's only one of them. If one looks at the history of some of our city's most desirable neighborhoods today and recognizes what a staggering number of them were once declared miserable, deteriorated, expendable slums, then a truly creative path reveals itself. It may surprise some of you to know that Greenwich Village, Georgetown, Back Bay, Society Hill, Charleston's Battery, Savannah's waterfront and city center, Cincinnati's over the Rhine, New Orleans' Friends Quarter, Garden District, and more were all once declared slums by experts. Manhattan's Upper West Side, where I live, or Brooklyn's Park Slope, which you hear about today because everything's Brooklyn in New York. Clearance was never the key to their revitalization. Rebirth surely was the result. You can read about this regeneration process in any of my 3 books. The current one talks about the experience that I lived with my family on the Upper West Side. So by now you begin to see why I am a fan of the great assortment of positive things happening in cities like Syracuse, New Orleans, Buffalo, Portland, Houston, and even in some neighborhoods of Detroit, which I have recently written about. Innovative strategies are being applied, positive things and people added to the existing city, not replacing it, not overwhelming it, and not shrinking the area of activity. Right-sizing the city has a different meaning in these places. Neighborhoods are being regenerated by adding the positive. I can't repeat that often enough, rather than straining to remove the negative. As neighborhoods revive, the larger city gains. With these pioneering resettlers are coming new businesses, some small manufacturers, and web-based businesses, all adding up to the beginning of a new economy. And if we don't try to figure out what the new economy is, we're going to be stuck in the depression we're in now, because there's too much hand-wringing going on still over what we've lost instead of trying to figure out what we need to gain. And it won't be all tourism, I promise you. Slowly but surely, small things add up to real momentum. In Syracuse, for example, abandoned homes are getting reclaimed, renovated, and sold to new residents. Houses in the most blighted neighborhood are being sold for $1. Some buyers are renovating themselves, others hire contractors. Absentee landlords are feeling the heat of enforcement. In Buffalo, this is what they're doing. And then neighborhood folk are coming into court and tracking down the absentee landlords and saying, you know, we'll take the house off your hands for $2,000. It's happening. There are all sorts of innovative things happening out there. Neighborhood groups are organizing cleanups and creating appealing gathering spaces where people congregate and even share barbecues in some of these cities and other communal activities. Gardens are replacing small empty lots. New businesses are emerging, and big, long-time empty industrial buildings are showing new life. In one neighborhood in Syracuse, an 8-year tulip bulb giveaway saw 17,000 bulbs planted. This was more significant than one might imagine. The new flowers were a sign of caring about the neighborhood, investment in being there, and residents began other small improvements, all adding up to new strength. Trees and flowers are never so important as when they are taken away and missed. Just ask the residents of New Orleans. In fact, regeneration of my Upper West Side neighborhood started way back in the early 1970s with flower boxes in brownstone windows, a small sign that people cared. I was reminded of this today. Bruce drove me through one of the neighborhoods in Muncie where a couple of historic homes are scheduled for demolition. Idiocy, as far as I'm concerned. It will mean nothing but subtraction from that neighborhood and is a signal to the rest of the neighborhood disinvestment is the future, not reinvestment. Why should any of the occupied property owners' homes plant one tulip bulb when they see the city putting its money into tearing down? Whereas if a single house in any neighborhood is upgraded, doesn't have to be to, high historic preservation standard. If it's just upgraded, if a few dollars of public money is invested in one building, it is a signal to the property owners of that community that the city is not going to let them down. When it goes the other way, I promise you, though, the house that comes down will be followed by other vacancies and abandonment. It doesn't go the other way. Caring is critical. Most American cities live with decades of bad decisions to tear down too much of each city. The easy route would be to tear down more. But then you have to ask, where is your soul? The biggest challenge, perhaps, is overcoming the state and federal regulations that make this revitalization direction so difficult. I happen to be a trustee of the New York State Preservation League. It took us years to get passed in the legislature the state tax credit for historic building restorations for moderate and low-income property-owning properties that could be so helpful with these challenges. Finally, and then, of course, in time for the economic fallout. But new construction and building code protectors fought us all the way. All sorts of regulations make a conservation strategy so difficult. When these efforts do work, it is only because endless hurdles have been overcome. Instead, this should be as easy as implementing a demolition contract. This is about building on existing assets, not erasing them, about recognizing precursors of rebirth instead of ignoring them, and believing in the organic process instead of relying on unsustainable project building. This is also about observable fact, not wishful theory. The real issue is how to learn from success instead of putting forth wishful thinking. The other night, President Obama talked about the need for American innovation to take hold again, to bring us out of this economic morass. Well, a direct link can be found between density and innovation. A 2006 study by the Federal Reserve, found that the number of patented inventions per capita is strongly related to an area's employment density, and employment density does not come without residential density. That study confirmed the view that the country's densest locations play a significant role in, quote, creating the flow of ideas that generate innovation and growth. It is density, my friends, that leads to a greater exchange of ideas and helps people develop, maintain, and extend skills that lead to technological and cultural innovation. This is so basic to why I find the shrinking city syndrome such a destructive path. Obliterating whole areas of deteriorated housing is just another way of giving up the past and the future. Nothing can be gained from this path. True innovation and creativity, however, can be found in following the regeneration path instead. I'd just like to add one thought. I hear a lot in many cities about we're not retaining our young are leaving. And I'll tell you where a lot of the young are going. They're going to Detroit, and they're going to New Orleans. They're going to Syracuse. They're going where creative opportunities are existent, where with whatever skills they have, they can do something. They know they're not going to get a job. They're graduating with the full knowledge that there are experienced people out there ahead of them, and that any place that might hire them will give them pencil sharpening as an assignment. Instead, in the neighborhood I wrote about in Detroit, I saw landscape designers designing a park. I saw preservationists rebuilding a building. I saw architects planning the interiors of some of these buildings. These kids were doing what they had just learned to do, like the students at Ball State now, in a way that they would never be able to if they got a job with the profession. You know, you in the audience, you professionals know, if you're going to hire anybody, you got people to hire back, skilled people that you've had to let go. So they're going where opportunities are afforded for them at almost no cost or little money. And some of them, you know, one kid in Detroit said to me, she said, you know, my parents are so thrilled that I'm graduating college. They don't have that college bill anymore, that they weren't hard to persuade to give me a subsistence stipend to be able to come here and live. And I want to tell you, these kids are living in places no adult would, and they won't 15 years from now, but they're ready to live in conditions because it's exciting and it's compelling. And I see these kids coming to New Orleans. I'm there now, not quite half-time, but they're going to the cities that are where opportunity exists. In the 90s, some of you might remember, after the wall came down in Berlin, that generation of American graduates and young professionals flocked to Prague, because Prague was the most exciting city and things were happening and there were exciting possibilities. And believe it or not, the Prague of today is in our most beleaguered cities. And if any of you in the audience, whether you're from Muncie or from Indianapolis, you want to give your young people something to keep them here, to challenge them, then find a way to do it like these other cities are doing. Give them the opportunity. Give them some of those houses you're ready to spend federal money to tear down. Give them some of it. Give them pennies next to the dollars it's going to cost you. Give them something that will get them started and will keep them here. And hopefully they'll stay. Hopefully they'll start their own new business or be the next employee for some of your established businesses. But otherwise, don't expect them to hang around because you're not giving them anything to hang around for. So, on that note, I will conclude my remarks and be open for questions and challenges. I accept challenges. I love challenges because, as Jane Jacobs used to say, it either confirms your own thinking or teaches you something new. So I've put out the challenge. Just show me one place where it's working and I'll learn something new. But I haven't had that yet. Thank you. So can I just field questions?
Yes, we're open for questions, both here as well as at the mothership in Indy. If you have any questions, please feel free to let us know.
And please don't be bashful.
Please.
Any questions?
Mm-hmm.
Those two guys right up there control $29 million of federal money that's going to tear down about 8,000 to 10,000 houses in the city.
In Indianapolis?
Yes.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Did I hit a nerve?
First of all, he's wrong. It's not tearing down 10,000 houses.
5,000?
No.
Well,
He didn't finish it.
Look at our Market Square Arena site that was torn down in 2000, I think, or 2001. We've been trying to redevelop that for 10 years. Now this spring, we're going to spend $800,000 to pave it because it's a parking lot. Now, I'm not saying Market Square Arena should have been saved, but we should have had a better plan for what we're going to do with it when we tore it down. And those are the kind of things we kind of get into when we get in a hurry about doing things.
listen, you know,
If you can perhaps
repeat
mention the, yes, for the benefit.
well, I don't want to repeat a factual error, so why don't we correct? Is that how many $1,000 for how many?
We have $29 million of NSP money.
Uh-huh.
And there are 8 neighborhoods that have combinations of new construction, rehabilitation, and demolition. And
Okay.
so there's no specific number of houses to be demolished with that.
So let's say that there's $29 million of neighborhood stabilization program funding to be spent, to be designated on either renovation, demolition, or new construction. So how you divide that up is critical, but you also mentioned that now they're going to spend how much? 800,000?
Yeah, the Market Square Arena site is a vacant site.
800,000 square.
According to our codes, when you have a commercial building or commercial parking lot, it has to be paved.
Well, you know what? I can't imagine you need another parking lot. I mean, I see a lot of parking lots in this town, so maybe 800,000 could just be, maybe you just put a fence around it and, you know, forget about it for a while and put the money elsewhere. But let me just say this. I could probably use Indianapolis and almost every city in this country as an example of what I'm talking about. You know, I was here years ago. I was here when you were building that mall, partially designed by someone I like very much in New York, and I disagreed with him totally. We've done a lot of the wrong things. There's no doubt about it. And we've built replacements badly. We have not built places that are street-friendly. Some of them now have retail frontage empty. Some of them have retail frontage, but accessible from the lobby, so the retail, the street door is always locked. The windows got blinds on them. You know, it's one thing to follow the code, it's another thing to live by it. Two different things. The critical thing is looking at the successes, and in every city now we have some successes. I couldn't say this when I used to do this lecture in one form or another 20 years ago. I only really was preaching to the choir because there weren't good examples of the reverse. But something's happened very interesting in the last 20 years. The market, that wonderful thing, the market is showing that people want, and particularly young people, they want downtowns. They're moving into loft conversions. Everybody's trying to find the new Soho-style loft. And every downtown that's converting loft buildings is getting people moving in, even in this economy. People are on the street. They're gravitating to restaurants with cafes, and students are flocking to downtowns. So we have our examples, and while I didn't have the chance, I was hoping to see more of Indianapolis on our way in. At the behest of Cynthia, we did drive down Mass Ave, and you have a good example of doing the right thing and having it work. And what were one of the early catalysts? The Coca-Cola building, the preservation of some of your really important buildings. And, you know, let's be honest about historic preservation. Let's get over this idea that it's some cultural artifact, high-level, elitist kind of thing. It's about understanding what worked and making sure it can work again. So we're not talking about buildings that are unusable artifacts. And in fact, I would venture to say that there is rarely a building that you could show me be built before World War II, including every church, post office, grain silo in this country that cannot be converted. In fact, one of the most interesting early preservation conversions in this country was in Ohio, and it was a grain silo to a Hilton hotel. So that's not far-fetched. But show me one building built from the 60s on that could be anything but what it is. So it's talking about, it's understanding what works. It's not about anything. It's not just cultural. It's not just aesthetic. It's not just architectural. It's not just history and legacy and all those things. It's all of those things. But fundamentally, I look at it as what works. I consider myself an urbanist, of which preservation is one component. Public transit is part of that urbanism. Public schools are part of that urbanism. All those things together. I have to say, I was so impressed by when Bruce was telling me about this program that was just announced. It's interdisciplinary. The problem is, after World War II, everything became siloed. I would go into towns and I would say, you know, you planners may be terrific, but you're not in control of this town. Your transportation guys are. They're the ones who are going to decide whether the road gets widened, whether traffic goes one way, two way, whether the sidewalks, you know, are allowed to get widened. But they don't talk to the planning side or the housing side or the neighborhood side. So anything that is now interdisciplinary is really a step in the right direction, because until it all works together, the success ratio won't be high enough.
I'm a little concerned about what I'll call the cult of density. I don't doubt that there's a dynamic to density, and I'm certainly not an advocate of sprawl. But I think that there are thresholds of effectiveness past which things become less efficient again. So the idea that simply increasing density constantly, I don't think is an effective urban strategy. We get into other resource allocation things, solar rights and things like that. At a certain point, when you overdevelop.
Oh, your problem should only be neighbors arguing over solar rights.
Well, it's just that's just an example of the sort of thing when one thing gets too big, it shadows another thing. Christopher Alexander in a pattern language talks about thresholds, about the 6-story limit in urban design, talks about communities of 5,000 and this sort of thing. So aren't there actually
Well, first,
thresholds?
let me just repeat the question, because the question is a concern about the cult of density in terms of whether there should be thresholds, or what does that mean? First of all, let me make some distinctions here. Density does not mean height. The most dense neighborhoods in many cities are single family or 2-family, under three stories or under. The triple decker in Boston and New England is, I consider, one of the most effective. The efficiency is the wrong word, because cities should never be efficient. When you have efficiency, you have stagnation. But because you need that urban chaos, you need the unpredictability, you need the dynamism that comes with that. But to me, it's the most viable urban form, because in the triple-decker you have the live-in property owner, the in-law apartment, as they call it, the mother-in-law apartment, and the rental unit. Or you have 2 rental units and the live-in. You have the flexibility. Do you know in New York City the most effective form is the brownstone? Do you know we can't build the brownstone today under today's building codes? Because anything over 3 stories, you need an elevator. Now, I'm all for ADA, but this is a little ridiculous. And the setbacks are now such that you can't. So we're getting the best we can get are 3-story row houses. But don't think the problem with density, and this always scares people because they think I'm talking about towers. You can keep the height level of your neighborhood at a maximum 2 or 3 or even 4-story probably is the best, because you can get some useful small multifamily housing in 4-story. Maximum height, and still have a very dense neighborhood. So we have to understand the difference between density and height. And also you should know Brooklyn was once alone the 3rd largest city in the country. And at that time, there was not one building over 12 stories, and the dominant scale was 4 or 5-story brownstones. But your early trolley car neighborhoods, streetcar neighborhoods, of which you have many, those are very dense, single family. Although I don't know, does your code allow someone living in a big single family house to carve out a rental unit? Or are you forcing that person to sell in order to downsize, which is part of the destabilization pattern? Because if I can stay in my home as I get older and rent out part of it, I'm going to be a live-in property owner with a rental unit, not an absentee landlord. The alternative is I could leave and be an absentee landlord and not pay attention to my property. So density does not mean height. I agree with you. Height can be a problem. The distinction also has to be made between density and overcrowding. Overcrowding is the real problem. not density. And frankly, you get more overcrowding and more overcrowding in terms of poverty and problems in low density neighborhoods, because you have families piling up together, as opposed to sanctioning the two-family breakup. Again, homes, buildings like the three-story, the triple-decker, or the New York brownstone. At one point, my husband and I owned a brownstone. I write about this in the book, too. The brownstone in the Upper West Side originally was built as a single-story, middle-income dwelling. When people started moving to the suburbs and urban renewal started chasing people out of the neighborhood, because urban renewal really did do it. Thank you, Robert Moses. The brownstone owners broke up their brownstones into rabbit warrens of small apartments, and it was at the same time that a lot of the immigrants were coming from Puerto Rico. The West Side Story. So they crammed in, overcrowded the housing, and absentee landlords, neglect, redlining, all of those things, slum. Okay, a new version of urban renewal was introduced in our neighborhood, at any rate, as an anti-Moses alternative. And some money was allowed, some of the brownstones were preserved. High-rises were built on the avenue, which is very much a New York form, mid-block, low-rise, avenue high-rise. And homeowners were encouraged to buy the brownstones. That same brownstone became single-family, two-family, four-family, upgraded, all in the same building. This has happened to tenements as well, all of which at one point were declared slums. So all the housing that I'm looking at, that experts are saying it's old, it's tired, it's past its prime, it's not functional anymore, it's not true. It's that you're not thinking creatively of what you can do with it. And your investment in the long term is going to be sounder, because you're going to have a building, these buildings that are called old and tired are over 100 years old already. Have you looked at some of the stuff that's been built in the 60s? Where would you rather live? I mean, we haven't built the quality, the long-term quality that we built before the war. So I wish there were a cult of density. I don't think there is. But I think, because I think density, understanding density is still only just beginning to really be recognized, and it's too often confused with height limitations. So I agree with you on height, but I encourage density with height limits.
We have a question from the...
I think a lot of the folks that are advocating planned shrinkage are dealing with metro areas that are actually losing populations and that have declining economies, like Youngstown and Cleveland, Detroit, where there's no sense that there's enough economic activity to fill these neighborhoods again, and where what you're seeing is an emptying out of the neighborhoods as far as people go, not necessarily the structures first. And so I think the folks that I know that are advocating that actually do believe in density. What they're trying to do is create density in pockets in those cities as opposed to spreading out the people in a declining population. So I mean, what would you advocate that those cities do when they have fewer people living there every year? And I guess you could apply the same thing to neighborhoods that don't really have a lot to offer as far as metro areas, or neighborhoods that are not adjacent to downtown, or don't have great architecture, or don't have great access to transit or interstates, that just struggle with any kind of competitive advantage and are losing population already.
I will repeat for our other audience that the people advocating shrinkage in Youngstown, Detroit, and Cleveland, and places like that are dealing with cities that have no economy to support new growth and are continuing to lose, and that they're trying to concentrate density. And it's a fancy way of saying exactly what I'm saying. You're planning for shrinkage, and you're going to continue to shrink. And I keep hearing this, I'm told, oh, but, you know, Detroit's different, Youngstown's different, Cleveland's different, every place is different. But what are you doing to grow a new economy? What are you doing besides wringing your hands that we will never have the automobile industry we once had? We're not going to have the steel industry we once had. But some of those components can be other things. I tell the story in my current book. I'm the owner of a manufacturing company, not happily in a sense, because my husband died 7 years ago. It was his business, the family business, started in the 1920s by his father, a very unusual metal fabrication business, furniture, sculpture, Pilates, blah, 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 blah. The history of our company is the history of change. In the 50s, we did a lot of work for the aerospace industry. They were on Long Island. They were not on the West Coast. They left, and we could have just folded up shop. So it turns out we wound up in the furniture business. Mies van der Rohe walked into town. He needed a place. We were the first. That company, Knoll, eventually took that furniture and went to their own factory in Pennsylvania. Pilates walked in. They needed a place. We were it. Architects, sculptors, all sorts of people come and go, and we're always having to change. And at any point in that progress, I could have told you, what's the point? It's gone. Aircraft industry's not coming back to New York. Knoll is not bringing its furniture back to New York. We do make one thing left for Knoll, because they don't make it themselves. So my challenge is, what are you doing about helping nurture the new industry, the new economy? So I was in Detroit. There's a very creative School of Creative Arts, I think it's called. I haven't yet had a chance to write about this. I was so impressed. We had one of the functions there, and as I walked in, on exhibit were all these things produced in Detroit by graduates of that school. Apparently that school has graduated a lot of automobile-related designers. But I saw fabric design, I saw pottery, I saw some practical, appliance stuff, all being created in small ways in that city. If a city is, I have said this for so many years, I'm waiting for one community to listen to me. I've said it in small towns and I've said it in big. Do you have any idea what's being made in the garages of people's homes in your community? Do you know what anybody's invented? Do you know if there is a Bill Gates among you? Or a Zuckerberg? Does anybody know? You won't know until you offer them the space to bring their company out of the garage and into a space. I wrote a piece recently. All this is on, I think it's all on my website. Sometimes I forget to upload. But I wrote about the renovation, the rebirth of a small community in upstate New York, 30 miles out of Rochester. Can't get smaller than this community. Very smart developer. I love this guy. He's my favorite developer. I've written about him because he's responsible for having started the whole revival of Red Hook in Brooklyn, because he took the pre-Civil War warehouses that everybody wanted to tear down, and he's made them into incubators of young businesses. So he took all of his successful ideas and he went to this upstate community and literally has brought onto the main street, a bakery, a sign manufacturer, a mustard maker, I mean, all these little people who are doing things in their home or in their kitchens. And suddenly there's a whole new local, this is a small town. So I'm saying when I hear this from Youngstown and Detroit and Cleveland, I'm saying, so you have a problem, and you tear down all these buildings, and what makes you think things are going to be different? What is going to be different other than having more vacant space? What are you doing to add the positive instead of pulling back the negative? Detroit has been has been undermining itself for years. 15 years ago, I wrote about this saying, they have two stadiums and 3 casinos. Do you know what they tore down for that? That was a period when they fell below 1 million. They chased people out of their neighborhoods. They blew up one of the best downtown resources when they blew up Hudson's department store, which could have been converted into a magnet for downtown growth. And yet, Detroit has some fabulous stuff downtown. And some of it is being upgraded despite city policies and without city financing. So all I'm saying is look at the positive. Understand what goes into the positive. I know who some of the people are you're talking about, and I say to them, this is not about changing land values and aggregating. I mean, it's all this fancy real estate talk, which is all gibberish, because all it is more description of empty land that will sit there. And then they'll be thrilled when a developer comes along and builds suburban housing. And that will be wrong for the city. Because, my friends, suburbanized cities don't work. So I know those people. And they haven't answered one of my questions. Just show me where it works. Convince me. And they only keep telling me of how it's different because they lost steel or whatever.
Rebecca, before we wrap up, I would like to give a chance to someone in Muncie.
Oh, please.
Ask a question, if you don't mind.
Please.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me on this?
Okay. Is it coming there? Okay.
Well, my name's David. I'm a 5th-year landscape architecture student. You guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I'm actually from Cleveland, Ohio. I've seen in the last few years a really strong emergence of young artists and innovators. So it is a pretty exciting time, and I'm a strong proponent of density. But my question looks ahead 40 or 50 years, assuming we do densify our cities and we lessen our dependence on automobiles. How do you foresee we deal with those thousands of miles of highways and millions of cookie-cutter houses that we built in the last 50 or 60 years? Does densifying our cities solve some problems while only creating others?
Well, I won't be around to deal with that, but you will.
Good luck with that.
Good luck. I wish that problem on you. It's very interesting, and Cleveland, by the way, has some perfect examples of what I'm talking about, the positive, not just the negative. But Cleveland is not learning from its own successes. We are there are places in the country that are taking down the highway overpasses and reconnecting neighborhoods and reweaving the urban fabric. I would say I'm not for ripping it all apart. I'm a conservationist. Even I would say you'll wind up rebuilding some of those plastic kind of homes, and you may replace them with real, quality products. But if we have the population growth that we're going to have, if the experts are right, don't think it will be as what they think it is, because these projections always go one way and they don't account for earthquakes and famine and economic disasters, because a lot of the immigrants that have come to this country are either returning home or not coming, so a lot of that population isn't growing. But I would say that nothing, some of it might